Good morning, everybody. Thanks very much for joining us. We're going to get started now. For anybody else who wants to join and come in as we get going, we'll move forward. Thanks very much for joining us today. Really excited to have this great event in AMA with Jeff Gothelf. Just a few housekeeping items before we get starting. We will have the recording available after today's session. You'll find it on our Product Makers community in a few days. Just look under for the recap topic under what's new or today's event, and we'll have that available for you. Also, please utilize the Q&A for questions today. This is an AMA style session. We'll be paraphrasing your questions back for Jeff, and Jeff will be providing answers for those. I encourage you to use the Q&A as part of that. Chat for chat if you want to leave comments and different things along the way. We'd certainly love to hear that as well. We won't be utilizing the raise hand function at all today, either for this particular event. So feel free to, again, ask your AMA questions in the Q&A section. We'd love to hear them today as we get started. I'm really happy to welcome Jeff today. Jeff, if you don't know him, helps organizations build better products and the cultures that build better products. He's the co-author of the award-winning book Lean UX, as well as a number of other books, including Sense and Respond, and his most recent, Forever Employable. He's a former software designer and now a coach, consultant, and speaker, helping companies bridge the gaps between business agility, digital transformation, product management, and human-centered design. I'm super excited to welcome Jeff today. And Jeff, thank you again for taking the time to participate in this and be friends with our community, I guess, on this side.
My pleasure, Scott. Thanks so much for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here and nice to be connecting from, I guess, technically the other side of the world, right? I'm in Spain, Barcelona. Yeah. And so like almost as far away from you as I can get before starting to come back, I would guess, right?
Yeah, exactly. So I'm gonna kick things off while we wait for some other people to ask the questions and add some things here as part of this AMA session. But I first got to see you speak years ago at a conference in Brooklyn. It was a small one being put on by Christina Wodke. I don't even know if you remember this conference. But you got up and you played jazz with a group of people.
Oh, yeah.
And if I remember correctly, I think you didn't even know the group of people. Or maybe you knew them, but hadn't really played.
There were two of us who had done it, but the rest of the players we didn't know. There were two
exactly.
Of us.
And you talked after that sort of chat about the relationship between jazz and the kind of trade-offs that musicians make between one another. You know, how they collaborate, improvise, and kind of build something together. And I'm kind of curious, maybe just drawing on that experience and maybe your experience and influence in music. Me being a former musician, as you can see with all the gear behind me. How has music influenced your thinking about product, and kind of what lessons from that do you find kind of important and critical to kind of consider as a product person?
That's a great question. Thank you for asking that. That's I don't get to ask that very often, so that's great. So that event was a series of shows / presentations I did with Jim Callback. Jim's a bass player, he's a jazz upright bass player. UX and UX guy, and written a couple of really good books. Mapping Experiences was his most recent one, very successful book. And we did this thing called Mode Shift. It was called Mode Shift, actually, the name for it. And the idea was that there are a ton of similarities between playing music and building great teams and collaboration, which ultimately deliver great products and services. And the interesting thing about that is the takeaways from that particular conversation was really more about team building, but the teams, when you see and jazz is an interesting metaphor. There's, you can talk about orchestras versus jazz bands and that type of thing. But jazz is an interesting metaphor because it feels random. Like when you sit down, if you're not a musician and you kind of watch a jazz band play, it feels like they're just playing whatever they want. Right. And the interesting thing is that there is an element of improvisation, obviously, to jazz, but it's based upon a framework. There's a structure underneath there. There are rules. There are, time signatures and keys that you're playing in. There's forms to the song. And the interesting thing is that the form, really, if you think about it, right, the form of the song, the verse, chorus, bridge, chorus, that type of thing, really forms a sprint. If you're trying to kind of tie this stuff together, it forms a sprint. And the interesting thing is that as each time the band goes through that form or that sprint, they get an opportunity to improve what they're doing and what they're doing together and how they're doing it. And the way that they do that is by being humble, right? And employing humility by saying, look, my goal here is not to be the star. My goal is to collaborate with these folks that I'm working with, that I'm playing with, to make us all successful, to deliver something our audience wants.
Mm-hmm.
And in doing so, I have to pay attention to those folks. I have to collaborate with those folks. I have to understand what they bring to the conversation. And most importantly, and this is the thing that we took away, there's a TED talk, a TEDx talk by a guy named Stefan Harris. He's probably the greatest living marimba player at the moment, right? And he talks about how the name of the talk is there are no mistakes on the bandstand. And what he talks about is how with listening and collaboration and respect for the people that you play with, your job is to make your colleagues look good, right? And not throw them under the bus. So in the event someone does make a mistake per se, right, or does something that is unexpected, don't treat that as a mistake, treat it as an opportunity to improve. And that's really interesting, right? Because I don't think we see that in the real world, in the product development world. I think we see people make mistakes, we're like, oh, you screwed that up, right? And we're going to call you out on that, rather than, well, okay, that wasn't what we expected, but is there anything we can learn from that and build on top of that? And so there's tons to take away from collaboration, from humility, from understand, like for example, I remember one of the most successful techniques, in the first half of my career to become a better designer was simply to sit next to developers, to understand what they brought to the process. Because I wasn't a software developer, and I knew they wrote code, but there had to be more to it than that, right? And there obviously is. And so sort of understanding what everybody brings to the conversation and how you can build off of each other, it's so critical to ultimately delivering a great product or service. And in the case of a jazz band, it's a great performance. And in the case of our world, it's products and services.
Yeah, that's great. That's a great answer. Yeah, I love the sort of, again, I used to be a jazz musician back in the days, but like that idea of sort of like giving people space, and looking for those opportunities again to like riff off of each other's reactions and all those kind of analogies that kind of come with jazz and stuff like that. I'm going to kick in one of the first kind of questions that we've got here. It's from one of our attendees. Is what's the best way you have seen that lean UX can be scaled, especially in large enterprise environments?
Yeah, and that's a really interesting question, because look, we talk about it in the third edition of Lean UX, which came out just last year. We do start talking about scale much more so than we did in the previous two versions. The successful scaling of this way of working that we've seen comes with a few prerequisites. So the first prerequisite is support, organizational support for this way of working. That means that our discipline leads get it, our business unit leads get it, our stakeholders get it, the middle managers get it. And so there's an education effort that has to take place there. Whether that's giving them a copy of the book, having them go through training, having them watch a video, whatever it is, or just teaching them yourselves what this means, there needs to be an understanding of what the process is, the value it brings, and then ultimately support for it. That's number one. The second element of success when I've seen things scale well is that the scale comes over time, small wins that are themselves scaled based on the evidence collected from those small wins. And so I've never seen a successful scaling of Lean UX or any other process, frankly, where someone says, we're changing this overnight and everybody has to do it, right? That's a recipe for failure, guaranteed. What I have seen work is when you take a small subset of the organization, a team, two teams, time box their attempts to try this new way of working. Let's say it's 12 weeks or a quarter, and you leave them alone and you let them figure out A, how to do this, and B, how to do this at your organization, because your organization is going to be different than every other organization. And then assuming they did a decent job, they were successful, they delivered some good products, they learned a lot, then you take their learnings and now you can spin up a second team and a third team and a fourth team over time. And so you're just like Lean UX talks about, right? In a very real way, you're running a process experiment, right? You have a hypothesis, You have the hypothesis is that implementing this way of working will make us more successful, more efficient, more customer-centered, whatever it is, right? And you're running these process experiments, these 12-week, 8-week long experiments with 5 people or 10 people, and you're collecting evidence. And if the evidence says, yes, this works, then you can use that evidence to scale the scope of the next experiment because you've got that win under your belt. And that's how this stuff grows over time. And in the most successful companies that I've seen do this, the language has been institutionalized. So everybody uses the same words and the words mean the same thing to everybody. It's really important because we've scaled the vocabulary, and there's an infrastructure to support the work. And so what do I mean by that? I mean that for example, there is an analytics, there's access to analytics, right? So the data exists and people have easy access to it. Research is common, it's supported, it's funded, and it's something that's relatively easy. Can I talk to my customers? Yes, you can. Scaling learning, distribution of learning, right? So if you think of this from an ops perspective, this is kind of a mix of design ops and research ops and product ops, like leveraging bits and pieces of all of those practices. But this stuff has been institutionalized and supported with products, services, team members to make sure that this way of working can function at scale with a lot of people doing it, and without the need to kind of run everything up and down. Hey, can I get access to the analytics? Hey, can I go talk to a customer? Hey, can I talk to 2 customers? Hey, can I get $100 to give to the test participant? That type of thing. And so this is to me, those are the successful ways that I've seen this scale.
Yeah, that's really great. That's a great answer. Thanks for sharing that. I guess kind of maybe follow on that, like in the context of these kind of scaling activities, can you talk a little bit about maybe the benefit of like working with someone like yourself, like a coach, a practitioner of some type that's an expert in this space versus maybe a team tackling this on its own? And I think the reason I'm asking the question is, I know you largely wrote the book to give people a toolkit to go do this on their own, but you also essentially work as a coach and teacher and mentor on this exact same kind of practice. Yeah. I'm kind of curious on like maybe like when someone would want to choose the do it themselves, a kind of experimental path versus like get some support to do that.
Yeah, so a couple things. So as a coach, right? So expertise aside, right? All coaching expertise can have expertise in it. I think the value of working with an external coach on this, there's 2 things that come to mind. One is pattern recognition, and the other is no baggage. So let's talk about each one, right? So as a coach, I have worked with a variety of organizations as a teacher, right? And look, as much as we like to think every organization is unique and it has its own unique challenges and problems, right? The context might be different, but the challenges repeat themselves. The problems show up again and again and again. The same questions, the same obstacles show up again and again and again. And at some point, if you've got a seasoned enough and experienced enough coach, they can get you unstuck very, very quickly. They can save you several cycles of learning so that you don't have to figure this out yourself. I've seen this at 5 other clients. Let me show you 3 different things that we've done to get unstuck here, right? So that pattern recognition is extremely valuable. The second part, as I mentioned, is no baggage. So as an external coach, I have no allegiances. I have no politics. The only thing I want to do is make you successful.
Yeah.
I have no fear of anybody in the organization. I don't worry about getting promoted or getting a good review. I don't want to get fired, right? But in a sense, my job there is to not only help you be successful, but to identify and call out obstacles to that success. And so I can go talk to your boss or to your stakeholders in a way that you might not be comfortable doing. I can go ask the question that you don't want to ask. I can ask the things that are considered dumb questions that everybody's afraid or assumes they know the answer to. I can go ask those because that's my job. And so in many ways, I can serve as a buffer to that without fear of retribution. And of course, I'm not going to do it disrespectfully, right? But my point is that I can do it without fear of retribution or any risk to my career at that organization, that type of thing. And that's a huge value as well, to give people that opportunity.
Yeah, that kind of psychological safety on that side. That's really great.
Yeah.
I'm going to jump to another question I got. This one a little bit over chat. So pardon the not in the Q&A for those that are following along on this side, but what's the best way to apply lean UX principles in an organization with very low or zero UX maturity?
What's interesting, that's a really good question, because I feel like there needs to be an understanding of the UX practice, of design, of research, of experimentation and learning, and if an organization does not have that, then coming in and saying things like, well, here's how those practices integrate with Agile and Scrum and build in cycles of learning, it's going to be really difficult. There's something to be said for addressing the low UX maturity aspect first and getting some kind of a baseline understanding across the organization that this is what UX is, this is what design is, this is what research does, this is, I'd even introduce design thinking and lean startup and those types of concepts, so that there's a baseline of understanding. Because the logical next question for most organizations is like, okay, that's interesting, and this one's interesting. Well, how do they play nice together? Well, have I got a book for you, right? Right. But that's so really, I think perhaps the focus is don't apply lean UX principles just yet, but rather focus on up-leveling to at least some kind of a baseline foundational understanding across the organization of UX design, research, design thinking, and lean startup, and then add in this next layer of complexity, because that's going to be the next question in those conversations. It's inevitably the next question, and lean UX is an answer to that question.
Yeah, that's great. That's a great answer. I'm going to jump to the next one. What are some of the new challenges you have seen with teams and companies endeavoring to apply lean UX since your book was first released?
It's been a decade, so
yeah,
lots of stuff have come up. Look, I mean, I think the complexity of work has increased dramatically, but a couple things have become really interesting, right? So first of all, the pace of learning, right? Fundamental shift. 10 years ago to today is a world of difference, right? Even so, our second book, Josh Seid and I wrote Lean UX together. We also wrote a second book together called Sense and Respond. In Sense and Respond, we did primary research for that book, primary and secondary research for that book in 2015 and 2016. The book was published in 2017. In 2016, Amazon was pushing code to production every 11.6 seconds. So 5 times a minute, Amazon was pushing releases live, okay, which is incredible, right? Today, it's every second, right? 60 times a minute, some Amazon customer somewhere in the world experiences a change in the system. That's across their entire product suite, which is fairly vast, right? And they're at the extreme end of this. But the point here is that this is a tremendous opportunity for learning for organizations. And it presents us with the ability to learn at a pace that's unprecedented, right? Even 10 years ago, it still would take several days, if not a week or two, to really get some meaningful data or something out into production and then some meaningful data. Again, today, and again, Amazon's the leading edge of this. You can put ideas into the hands of customers, and they don't have to be fully formed ideas, but some ideas into the hands of customers as fast as you want. Right? It's just a matter of investment in the infrastructure to do so. And so that has built a tremendous learning opportunity. So okay, we're not all going to deliver code once per second. But if you're only shipping to production twice a year, and there's still plenty of organizations that are doing stuff like that, or once a quarter, right? Maybe think about, like, there's a real opportunity now to maybe double that. Hey, what if we ship twice a quarter? You doubled your learning opportunity, right? That type of thing. And so I think that that's a big change. I think fundamentally in the last decade, the shift to mobile, I mean, it feels so antiquated to even say that now, but that really, like a decade ago, that revolution was on its way. Today, it's the default. Like
Yeah.
And really, like, the variety of different experiences that people can have today, VR, AR, talking, AI in interactions, voice command, obviously touching, gestures. There's so much complexity to the world of design today that has created, again, tremendous opportunities for creating fantastic products and services, but also complicates the development process as well. And I think finally, the last thing to talk about is Agile. I mean, even 10 years, obviously, Agile's been around officially since 2001, technically. And so 20 years, 21 years at this point. 10 years ago, it was certainly being adopted very quickly. In the 10 years since, you'll be hard pressed to find an organization that will admit that they're not Agile. They may be lying, right? But no one will raise their hand proudly. We're waterfall, right?
Yeah.
Like no one's going to be like, yeah, we're not doing it. Screw Agile.
No bragging rights there.
Right. Like no one's going to raise their hand and do that. And so that has been such a transformative idea across the really the full spectrum of business, that you have to be able to speak about doing your work, product management, design, research, in that context, right? You could try to push against it. There's lots of folks that they're still pushing against it. It's an uphill battle. I'm not saying it's not worth fighting, but I think you have to make a strong case for it. But generally speaking, if the rest of the organization is going to attempt to be agile or to practice agility in some way, you have to be able to speak to that from a product management perspective, from a design perspective, from a research perspective. And I'm going to humbly say that Lean UX, the book, will provide you with at least a vocabulary to use. Again, it doesn't have to be the definitive vocabulary. Give you a good place to start from.
That's great. Great answer. I'm going to jump to the next one. How do you get a very business-focused company to understand the value of a true design discovery focus and actually become a product company? In this case, the situation is that they have a lot of people that are comfortable with being the loudest one and just escalating to get things done or pushing things through, which leads to lots of product mistakes and customers ultimately end getting the wrong product.
There's a couple of things that come to mind, and there's lots of ways to deal with this, and all of them really are going to vary by the culture of the company and your position in the company, how influential you are, how much risk you're willing to take, that type of thing. So a couple of things that come to mind in no particular order. One thing you can do is, before starting a new initiative, do a retrospective on the last initiative, particularly if your organization has become comfortable with the practice of retrospectives. Holding a retro about the last initiative is a great way to talk. Hey, how did we prioritize work last time? Well, Jeff shouted the loudest and he's got the biggest title, so we did what he wanted. Okay, cool. And how did that work out? Well, we promised Jeff a bunch of stuff and we delivered about a third of it. Okay, at least we delivered something. What impact did that have on the company? We don't know, right? Or no impact, or who knows, maybe it was awesome, right? Jeff's right, or whatever, right? But the point is doing a bit of that retro to identify the pain points in the last time, and then saying, you know what, what we might try differently this time around is, instead of going by sort of the highest paid person's opinion or whoever's shouting the loudest, why don't we identify the number one or two business problems that we want to solve, or the challenges that our customers have in being successful? We know what they are. They keep leaving and telling us about it, right? Why don't we take those on first, right? So but it's risky, right? So you have to be, I think you have to be fairly comfortable in your organization to do that, because in many ways, you're going to point out some flaws in other people's methods the last time around. So there's a bit of risk there that I would absolutely highlight. But that's an approach. Yep. Another approach, and it's a tactic that we use when we teach Lean UX. It's a tactic that that I've written about. It's in the current version of the 3rd edition of Lean UX, and it's an exercise where we visualize the connection between what people do in the system to the health of the business. And it's a diagramming exercise where, and I'll drop a link in the chat here. I'll send it to you to add to the recording, Scott, at some point. There's a blog post from a few years ago on my blog that describes the exercise. But essentially, we get our stakeholders in a room and we say, okay, great. At the highest level, what matters to us as a team, as a business unit, as an organization? And they typically say the same thing, right? Sales, profit, customer satisfaction, retention. Okay, terrific, cool. Let's put all that stuff up at the top of the board, digital board, physical board, however you're working today, right? Terrific. Now, what do people do in the system or in the product or the service that is a leading indicator of sales? Okay, and they'll say things like, well, they visit the website, they come to the store, they visit the website a second time, they put something in their cart, they fill out a mortgage application. Right? They send us an email asking about what types of mortgages we have, whatever it is, right? And you get them to kind of do that for all of those top layer, what we call impact metrics, right? High level measures of the health of the business. And then we say, great, let's take it down another level, right? What are the behaviors that people do before that? Essentially what we're doing is we're building an upside down customer journey map that flows out and really visualizes all of the various things that people are doing in the system that drives business success. So what we've done is we've left features out of it, and we're really focused on behaviors, outcomes. And then we say, great, now in the next quarter or 2, however you're prioritizing, what are the goals for the company? And typically your stakeholders will know, like increase sales by 10%, right? Profits by 25%, reduce cost of operations by X, whatever it is. Terrific. Okay, cool. Now we've got 10 teams, whatever, 5 teams, 7 teams. Of the 50 things we've now got on the board here, of 50 leading indicators, 50 outcomes, which ones do you think are the 10 most important ones for us to work on? Right? Because we can't work on all of these, right? And so they'll say, well, we definitely have to do this one. And so what you're doing there is you're doing 2 things in this exercise. Number 1 is you're visualizing the connection between outcomes, what people do in the product, to the success of the business. And that often is overlooked because people think in features, right? They say, well, we have mortgage applications online. Terrific. Is anyone filling them out, right? Is anyone completing, like, are they starting them? Are they finishing them? Like, how much help do they ask for, right? Those are interesting things. And so you're visualizing what people do and the impact that it has on the success of the company. And then the second part is prioritization. By doing that, you end up with dozens of these Post-it notes on the board, and it's overwhelming, and it should be, right? That's the feeling is like, there's no way we can focus on all those things, which is true and which is right. So, okay, so which 5, 7, 10 things should we work on? What are the priorities for the next quarter? And so you're asking them to prioritize outcomes, right? And then naturally, and so that's a great place to start. And then naturally they'll say, well, okay, well, great. Well, now what are we going to make? And you can say, well, let us think about that. We'll come back to you with some hypotheses, right? But that's a really nice way to shift the conversation from build me this because it'll make me money to make people more successful doing that, which will make me money.
Yeah.
And so it's a really good exercise, and I've got a link for you. I'll send it a little bit later.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's great. I'm going to jump into the next one here. A person that's a former product leader who's transitioned to helping transform HR people and culture teams to better support product organizations, agile transformation and design, great places to work. And she's, I guess, curious here on how might HR people teams better support product orgs and teams that have done, that are doing this essentially.
That's such a great question.
Yeah.
There's more than a couple of things to think about, but I think there's a lot to think about here. I think it starts at the beginning. It starts with job descriptions, right? So how are you writing your job descriptions? because that's going to determine who you attract and what expectations you're setting for them in their ways of working. If you're already working in this lean, agile design thinking kind of way, let's talk about that in the job description. Let's make it obvious, right? We want you to talk to customers. We want you to make evidence-based decisions. Like, we encourage you to find out if you're wrong about your ideas. We celebrate course corrections, right? Or whatever it is, right? We want to write the kind of job descriptions that attract people who already want to work this way, or have experience working this way, that can perpetuate this particular thing. So that's a great place to start. The second thing we want to think about from an HR perspective is performance management criteria and incentives. That becomes really interesting. It's a big, messy, tough thing to deal with, and most organizations will avoid it. In fact, I've worked with companies, big companies in the US and other countries, where they've invested millions in their agile transformation. Consultants, coaches, working spaces, trainings, videos, everything, but they won't touch the performance management criteria because it's risky and it's scary and it's a big, messy thing. But think about it, right? If we're teaching our people to manage to outcomes and to achieve outcomes, but we're incentivizing people to deliver output, right? They get rewarded, celebrated, promoted for delivering output. They're going to optimize for what gets them paid ultimately, right? And that friction is going to cause a lot of consternation inside the organization. And so the question then becomes, how do we rewrite performance management criteria for an agile organization, right? What kind of behavior do we want to celebrate and promote? That becomes really, really interesting. Again, I've got some ideas, but I'm not an HR person on that. But that's a massive thing, and it's risky. And I'll tell you why it's risky, right? I mean, because particularly if you're in an organization that's been around a long time, you're going to have folks in an organization who've been there a long time, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, whatever it is. And they've played by the rules, and they've bided their time, and they've had their sights set on that corner office or that promotion or that job title. And 17 years into their career, you're going to move the goalposts, right? That's mutiny. People are going to go berserk, right? People are going to go crazy. Like, 17 years I've played the game here. Now you're going to move the goal over here. Like, I was a year away from the corner office, that type of thing. And so there's a legitimate risk in there, but it's very much worth looking into, because if you don't incentivize the right behavior, then at the very best, it's going to cause friction with these ways of working. And at the very worst, it's going to break them in many ways. Yeah. And so I think that, and I've got one more idea, and this is from an HR perspective, and it's really, really important, is how can HR train people and encourage people to build psychological safety into the workplace? There's a lot of responsibility there, obviously, on managers and leaders, but HR plays a key component in this as well. And why do we need psychological safety? For a variety of reasons, but to support these ways of working is because we're often going to be wrong. And if we don't feel safe coming to our leaders, stakeholders, executives, whatever it is, and saying, hey, listen, we tried that thing last week, didn't work out, right? Here's what we've learned, and here's what we're going to do next. If that gets dismissed, if they get their hand slapped, if they get reprimanded, or their performance management reviews go down, they're going to stop doing that, and they're just going to deliver the thing that you asked them to do, and then this whole thing breaks. So it's a lot HR can do. Yeah,
that's a great point. Really great point. Yeah, I think one of the other cool things too, maybe I'll just add to that, is like, I know we've had really good success too from an HR perspective and partnering with our recruitment team and other kind of pieces, and some of those teams themselves, to really tell their story in a really great way about what the practices look like. So, everything from our podcast to, kind of other videos and other kind of assets and materials can go a long way to giving people a sense of kind of behind the curtain, what the company's culture, how they execute, and actually, take it beyond just the words to really show some good examples. So I encourage you to look at that as well on that side. I'm going to jump to the next one here. How do you recommend advocating for hiring and including more designers, especially in engineering heavy organizations?
That's a great question. So if there aren't enough designers, then perhaps not enough good design work is happening, and that's negatively impacting the product and the company. So can you call attention to that? Can you point out that, hey, you know what, the competition is killing us because it's just so much easier to use their product versus I was having lunch with a designer today, in fact, and we were talking about the apps that we use, and we were talking about banking apps, and we were comparing the big Spanish bank app that I use, and it's a monstrosity and it's a mess and it's tough to use, and versus TransferWise's app, Wise, they're called Wise now, right? Mm-hmm. Such a beautiful app, so easy, so simple. Everything is like 2 clicks and you're done, right? It's no wonder that there's so much disruption in the industry, right? And so I think that if you can point people to the benefits of design, the impact that the lack of good design is having on the business, and quantify it in ways that matter to the person that you're talking to, right? If you just say, look how beautiful the Wise app is versus our crappy banking application, they'd be like, whatever. But if you could say, look, because of this, their user acquisition numbers are 150% higher than ours on a monthly basis, right? If you're talking to somebody like that, that starts to become impactful, right? Mm-hmm. So it's important to call out the impact that the lack of good design, the lack of design work is having on the work that you're doing and the products that you're shipping. But it's even more important to tell that story with words that matter to the person that you're speaking to. And that, if you were to ask me sort of where does advocacy for design fail most often, it's that latter point. I think most designers can make a really strong case for the impact that bad design has on our product and good design has on the competition. Where most of the time people fail is in phrasing it in words that matter to that particular audience. And that's UX 101, is know your audience. Right?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, maybe a follow-up to that, I think from the same person as well, kind of thinking about it is like, and then if you're trying to advocate for this design role, like what's that kind of like right kind of like balance in terms of like the number of designers to other kind of product team members? I know we often think about this in the classic product triad of designer, product manager, engineer, and the relationship between that being so important, but maybe curious again here on your thoughts on how best to manage that piece as well.
There's 2 things that come to mind. So first of all, you need a design leader. I think a big mistake that a lot of organizations make, particularly smaller ones, big organizations make this mistake too, is they hire a lot of sort of individual contributor level designers, which is understandable. They're cheaper and they do actual production work on a daily basis, so that makes sense. But without any kind of leadership or mentorship, they're going to flail and they're going to leave very, very quickly. So hiring a design leader first, and then having them build the team is a better strategy in my experience. And then as far as sort of a ratio, really depends on the company and the kind of work that you're doing. When we ran our agency, and at its biggest, Neo was 7 offices, total of about 150 people though, total. Like the offices were anywhere between 10 and 20 people, 10 and 25 people. We built the smallest viable team. The smallest viable team for us was a product manager, a designer, and 2 engineers. And that was like the default team that you got on a project. And if a team needed to be bigger than that, we would give, it would maybe be 4 engineers, designer, product manager, 4 engineers. There was one, I think I remember one initiative where we went up to 6 engineers. I wouldn't go any bigger than that, right? So if like 1 designer, 1 product manager for 6 engineers feels like the top of the scale for me. But context is going to dictate, maybe you've got big teams, maybe you've got a front end team and a back end team and a QA team. And so that's roughly the way I think about it.
Yeah, cool. That's great. I'm going to jump to some other questions here. I'm going to jump around a little bit, make sure everybody gets a chance to be heard a bit. What's your guidance on the roles and responsibilities in lean UX practice, particularly around the overlap of PM and design and their kind of individual responsibilities, and how do you essentially get the team working most effectively together?
It's really interesting. In my experience, I've rarely, and again, look, I've done this work as a member of a bunch of teams. I've trained and coached a bunch of teams. there rarely seems to be a conflict. The teams naturally gravitate. Either there's a leader on the team, and I'll be honest with you, in Lean UX, typically it's the product manager. It doesn't have to be, but I'd say 8 times out of 10, it's the product manager. Or there's some kind of a, like the triad that you mentioned before, some kind of a power sharing agreement, right? Between a design lead, a product lead, and an engineering lead who help drive this process together. I can't recall a situation where there was sort of a power struggle for who's driving this. I think in many ways it makes sense for product to lead at least certainly some of the upfront exercises, right? So if you think about this from a Lean UX canvas approach, so the first step, box 1, is the problem statement, right? I would expect the product manager, the product leader, to drive that conversation. The second step is the outcomes, the success metrics, right? Kind of similar to the exercise I described just a few minutes ago. Again, this feels like a product management-led initiative. Mm-hmm. We get into boxes 3, 4, and 5. So it's users, user outcomes, and solutions, where we often do design studios, design charrettes, design sprints, that type of thing. That feels like maybe the UX lead takes over for boxes 3, 4, and 5. And then there's kind of a broad collaboration across 6, 7, and 8. So you could argue that the exercises sort of lend themselves to a particular discipline, but I'd say 8 times out of 10, a product manager will lead it. But I honestly rarely come across a situation where a team is fighting about like, no, I want to run this or I want to run that. It's sort of lends itself to a particular discipline. So
yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think a lot of times too about these in the context of like K against 4 risks, even, the valuable, viable, feasible, usable, like, the product manager being accountable for the valuable and viable part, answering that question, like, is this an important problem to solve? Should we be solving it, to your point, right? Like, does it fit within the hypothesis and the metrics that we know about? And then think about the feasible part of it, like, can we build this? Do we have the tools and capabilities? And the usable part is like, can our customers make sense of it? It seems like a great way to kind of split the role up in the context of that as well.
Absolutely.
What are some of the ways to implement or consider Lean UX in a small seed stage startup? Like when you're kind of like a little tinier maybe, or does it change even for that matter? I don't know if it does.
Look, so I can't see how you'd work any other way in a small, like you don't have the luxury of working any other way, in my opinion, because you don't have the luxury to make big mistakes, right? So here's what I mean. Sorry, I'll have a little space heater in here. It's getting really hot in my little office. You don't have like, in other words, like this. If you think about it from a waterfall, big idea perspective, like founders got an idea, the founder says, go build it. And you're like, okay, we're going to go build it. But what if you're wrong, right? You don't have that luxury. I think in a seed stage, you have to implement Lean UX. You have to implement design thinking and Lean startup, because you can afford small mistakes up to a point. You cannot afford a big giant mistake. You'll be out of money and you'll be out of business. And so you cannot take the risk of just building this one thing and hoping and sort of betting the farm on it, because if it doesn't work, you're done. And so small experiments, customer development, continuous research, continuous learning and improvement, short cycles is the only way that you stand a chance of surviving. Because the reality is the big idea, 9.8 times out of 10, you're going to be wrong. And so, I don't think you have the luxury to work any other way.
Yeah, it's good. I think that's a good summary. Do you feel that Scrum can get in the way of good product and UX design?
Scrum?
Yeah.
Not anymore. I think there's plenty of material out there today and plenty of folks from all sides of the product development world that have solved this problem. Look, Lean UX is a solution to this problem. The most, honestly, one of the most rewarding projects I've done in the last 5 years is Josh Seiden and I built a course called Professional Scrum with UX with Scrum.org, which is a Scrum certification organization. There are at least 2, more than that, but there's like 2 big ones, and Scrum.org is one of them. What made this rewarding is that they reached out to us, right? We didn't reach out to them; they reached out to us, and I love that because they understood that this is a problem. The Scrum guide and the conversation was exclusive of good design and research. It just the words aren't in there, right? And given that their Scrum's motto is inspect and adapt, this doesn't make sense. Like if without learning, without inspecting is experimentation, learning, adapting is changing course. That's agility, right? And so they reached out, and we worked with 2 professional Scrum trainers to write this class together that really brought together these ideas. And what I loved and what was rewarding about this is that they were willing to change the language. Right? So they were willing to change the definition of done, which is like the holiest of holy for, like Scrum purists, right? They were willing to to allow UX activities to span more than one sprint, right? We'll get as much done as we can in this sprint, and that might carry over to a second sprint, which in many ways is like a big no-no to Scrum. You've got to get it all done, right? And so I think the evolution of the process and the realities of today's ways of working in the last 20 years have forced this conversation forward in a good way. And I think that there are a ton of good resources today that talk about how to implement Scrum successfully with design, user experience, research, content, all of it.
Yeah, that's great. I know you can find that training, I think, on the scrum.org website, if I remember correctly,
absolutely.
right? Yeah. So anybody's looking for that training or want to be able to check it out or access it, that's a great place to look on that side.
Yep.
How have you seen the product and UX relationship play out at its best? And any kind of suggestions, again, on maybe roles and responsibilities? It seems to be a common kind of pattern maybe in here, but I think what people are curious about is maybe that working relationship and where it really is, on fire and kind of humming.
I've been on some incredible teams. I really have. I've been very fortunate, both in my sort of my in-house career, and then when we built our consulting companies, we were sort of practitioners and leaders in that organization. The most successful teams I've been on trusted each other. They trusted each other to do their own sort of discipline-specific work. We trusted that our developers were great. But we understood that success wasn't doing great research or writing great code or articulating the best requirements or defining the best success criteria. It was delivering customer value. And when there was an opportunity for someone to contribute to the process in a way that wasn't in their job description, that was okay with us, right? Because the purpose was not to make sure the developers wrote code all the time. The purpose was to deliver value to the customers. I'll give you an example just to make it concrete. One of the finest developers I've ever worked with. I've had the pleasure of hiring him twice in my career, and if I ever have another need, I'd try to hire him again. This is when I was living in New York. This developer would commute back and forth. He lived in Jersey City, so he'd have to cross the river every day to come into the city and back and forth. And we were building a product for a company that was, it was a service for small businesses. I think it was a digital marketing service for small businesses. Really like mom and pop storefront kind of stuff. He walked past bodegas, delis, laundromats, nail salons every day. And on his commute to work, he would pop in and do customer discovery work. 5 minutes, 10-minute conversations. Hey, how do you guys do digital media? What's digital media, right? When's the last time you bought an ad on Google? What's Google? Like literally like that kind of stuff. And he would bring that to work. He's like, hey, I stopped by 3 stores on the way in. Here's what I learned, right? To me, that's what made that team successful, is because he understood that he could bring more value than just writing code. And the team allowed that to happen, right? Another example is, we would all sit together and we would be kind of talking back and forth about an idea about how to implement a feature. And I'd say, hey, Greg, in this case, developer, let's go to the whiteboard. And we'd sit there together and we'd sketch I'd sketch something on the whiteboard and be like, what about this? And we'd kind of get it done. And the sketch, we'd get to a point where we're like, okay, this looks pretty good, right? And then we would both go back and do the things that we were individually good at. He would start laying the foundation for visualizing that in code, and I would refine the UX in design and that type of thing. But the collaboration built that shared understanding where we were able to cut out, half a dozen cycles of conversation because I trusted him and he trusted me. And that comes with time. It comes with time and the right incentives and the right people on a team as well. The right egos, that type of thing.
Yeah, exactly. That's great. What's the best way to create and grow design systems at a startup, especially when changes are kind of happening often?
So I'll be honest with you, I don't have a ton of experience with this. There's a great book. I'm going to recommend a book to you, which, there it is. Sorry, it's on my bookshelf over here.
I think we're both the same. We both got big stacks of books next to our desks.
Yeah, and that's so. This is a book from the Smashing Magazine, the folks at Smashing Magazine. It's called Design Systems. It's by Alla Kolmatova. And first of all, it's a beautiful book, as you might expect from those folks. And second of all, it's a brilliant how to get started. And so she's smarter than me. She's done this way more than me. Just buy this book from Smashing Magazine Press. That's my answer.
Yeah. No, that's great. That's a good answer. And it is a good read. Definitely encourage you to check it out.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Really good. I'm going to combine a couple of people's questions here, and we've got a few more minutes left essentially as part of this, but kind of thinking a little bit about kind of I guess the work that we do as product managers and the work that we do as product teams overall, particularly as we're working kind of globally, we're working more distributed, we're working more remote in some cases. How best to kind of approach essentially that work cross-functionally when we're working across different time zones and across different ways of interacting, where we can't get in front of the whiteboard, where we can't work together, and how best to kind of apply that to the lean UX principles and the execution that we do as part of that.
So look, there's no substitution, I think, for real-time collaboration. And so it's as I'm not going to tell you anything you don't know at this point in our shared reality these days. The tools exist for us to collaborate in real time together. The Murals, the Miros, the Google Docs, the Slacks, the Notions, whatever it is, whatever tools you're using, whatever works for you, the tools exist for us to collaborate and do the things that we would normally do in an office together, distributed in real time with Zoom and whatever else, right? So the tools exist for us to collaborate together. It takes a bit more explicit facilitation, right? Body language, you can't read, eye contact, you can't read, turn taking. So there's a bit more facilitation, explicit facilitation that needs to take place. The real challenge, I think, and there's an interesting debate that's kind of going on about this, is for this to work, you have to be awake at the same time, at least for a certain part of the day.
Mm-hmm.
And to share some time where we can hop into a call, into a mural board, put some Post-it notes up, some sketches, talk to each other, review some stuff, take some notes. That's critical, I think. That doesn't have to be the default way of working for everything. We don't have to do everything in real time together. There can certainly be a significant asynchronous component using Slack and whatever, a series of other tools. But I think the main takeaway is that it's the explicit facilitate, whereas if we all piled into a conference room at the office, someone would inevitably stand up and go to the whiteboard and start doing something and maybe drive the meeting. I think you have to be more explicit and more deliberate than that today, right? If you're going to call a meeting, you should know what your goal is, what tools you're going to use, and how you're going to facilitate that meeting. I think you need to do that extra level of prep to make this more successful. That's all. But otherwise, I think everything else basically remains the same.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Thank you, Jeff. I really, really appreciate your time today. I know I want to be mindful of getting you onto your next evening, I guess, that you got in Barcelona on that side. And I really do appreciate, again, you sharing your knowledge with our community. I'm just going to wrap a few things up here as we kind of close out the event overall. And so again, thank you for all the contributions as part of this sort of piece. Just a few things as well. We've got a post-event survey. I've just put a link inside the chat. You'll also get this over email, but encourage people to fill that out, share their knowledge and thoughts on the event today. We'd like to learn, get better at these, and do a really great job of these kind of activities. And invite you to continue the discussion and conversation as well within our own product community, productmakers.com. You can create a post, share your comments, add additional questions post-event. We'd love to hear that on that side. We've got some great events coming up. Tululupe Ayeni is going to be speaking with us on February 10th on the art of asking why, if you're interested in the topic of discovery and the work that's part of that piece. And we've got some other events coming up soon too as well. It'll be posted here shortly. Karina Stukin is going to be talking on data with her great event, Show Me the Data, which will be a fantastic discussion and conversation. We've got our very own Hubert Palin joining us on February 24th for an AMA as well. So a great chance to hear a little bit about not only Productboard, but his thoughts on product and customer centricity, which will be really fantastic. And lots of ways to get involved here in our community too. So we do invite you to participate in our roundtables. We hold monthly roundtables on the second Wednesday of each month. You can also participate in our Meet a Maker program, which gives you a chance to match up and meet people one-to-one within our community. And also, please feel free to get involved as a speaker as well. We're looking for lots of people to encourage and share their thoughts and ideas and contribute positivity and good energy to what we do as product people. Again, thanks very much for joining us. We really appreciate your time today. And thanks again, Jeff, for all the efforts and everything you've put into this session today.
My
Take
pleasure.
care, everybody. Oh, go ahead, Jeff. Sorry.
I was just going to say thanks very much. My pleasure.
No problem. Thanks very much. Take care.
Bye, everybody.